50,000 people packed in the stadium. Over 100 countries worldwide watching what is going to be the most cataclysmic boxing showdown in world history. In one corner, you have the world heavyweight champion, George Foreman. And in the other corner, you have the former world heavyweight champion, Muhammad Ali. The two questions, ladies and gentlemen, that we want to answer this morning is firstly, how is it that in 8 rounds, the world boxing champion, George Foreman, lost to Muhammad Ali? And secondly, but more importantly, how can we apply this to your winning business strategy in Africa? Ladies and gentlemen, if you can please allow me the courtesy of taking off these gloves. My name is Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi, and I have the... Good morning, madam. She's a partner in crime. And today I have the absolute pleasure of taking you through a journey called Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, and it's a masterclass of sorts. And in this journey, I want to unpack a few nuggets that I believe are absolutely critical for a winning business in Africa. There are 5 nuggets, or 4 nuggets, that I want to leave you with this morning. Nuggets that I've not only gleaned with regards to doing business in Africa from the spectacular fight between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali in 1974, but also from my own experience, having done business in Africa for the last 20 years in 20 different countries, as well as leveraging off some leading thought leadership. So the first nugget is understand your territory. The second is the role of innovation. The third is navigating through threats and opportunities. And the fourth is having a relentless drive and determination. Guys, are you able to see? Okay, Kay, can you see through me? Okay. Don't look too much at me because the way you're looking at me. And it's also going to be filled with fun because I've got some quiz that I'll be doing, and I've got some gifts with Belgian chocolate. Well, the Swiss chocolate was expensive, so I went cheap. That was a joke. That was a joke. But just a bit of who I am, just to give you context. So I've worked for a number of multinationals. 2 key organizations that have carved my experience has been Deloitte and Sage, which is a listed multinational company. And I've obviously advised a lot of private and public entities with regards to doing business in Africa. And I'll be drawing from that experience in 1 or 2 of the case studies that I'll be sharing with you. I also sit on a number of boards and subcommittees that focus in terms of doing business in Africa, as well as adjudicate some of the key events around leadership and development of both business people as well as women leaders, one of that being the Standard Top Women's Award. And from a business school perspective, I've been faculty to some of the leading business schools and I am currently around leadership and strategy in South Africa, as well as in the UK, the US, as well as Spain. But one of my greatest achievements, ladies and gentlemen, my creme de la creme when it comes to qualification, one that when you yourself see me on the streets, you must bow down and kneel and respect me. My greatest qualification, ladies and gentlemen, is that I'm a Chelsea supporter. Any Chelsea supporters in the house? Swiss, this is totally unacceptable. Also, totally unacceptable. Please, can you put a warning light out? I've also published a book, 2 books specifically. The second one is Reflections of a Son of the Soil. That is a collection of African proverbs. The books are available here for sale afterwards for those of you, some of you already started buying. And I've hijacked my 2 sons. They volunteered, they were on holiday, and they woke up and said, Dad, we want to go and help you. That's a lie. But when you pay school fees, you know you can do anything you want. But Reflections of a Son of the Soil for 2024 was a recommended book by Exclusive Books for all of their shops worldwide, countrywide. The second book, which pertains more to the discussion we're having today, is Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, Navigating the African Landscape. And this has been endorsed by 10 multinational CEOs, as well as heads of government, some from organizations that are in this room. I also speak on a number of platforms, some key ones, just to name a few: the Bruce Whitfield Show, the Money Show, talking about Africa Business Focus. It's now been taken over by Stephen Grotes, so I'm a regular contributor there. Also on Kaya FM with Google Mfupi around doing business in Africa, as well as in NCAA and one or two other leading platforms. But today is not about me, it's really about you and the impact that you and your organization can make. And as we go through this session, I hope to equip you and also have a bit of fun as we go through it, because Africa is filled with opportunity, challenges, but it's how you look at it. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be having a smile on your face as opposed to be looking so serious. Okay. So why are we here? In a nutshell, Africa is open for business. If that wasn't the case, none of us would be here. And I believe the opportunities that the continent lays before us just needs people with the right mindset. And most of you are already doing that, but hopefully I encourage you and inspire you to go to the next level. Okay, so let's set the scene of the fight, because by setting the scene of the fight, it lays the foundation for the 4 key nuggets that I want to leave with you this morning. So, George Foreman, 1974, was the world boxing champion. He was young, he was arrogant, and he was undefeated at that time. He represents that organization, could be a corporate, could be a multilateral organization that has been successful in different parts of the world, could be the US, could be Europe. For them, going on the African market is a walk in the park. There could be a South African corporate going into the rest of Africa, it doesn't matter, but they're well financed and they're well resourced. He represents the market leader. Muhammad Ali in 1974 was no longer the world boxing champion. If anything, he was trying to reclaim that position. And he represents the underdog that is just as hungry to take over in the African market, but is not as well resourced and financed. He was the gentleman who coined the phrase, float like a butterfly, sting like a... If you're able to answer that, it shows your age. The location of the fight was even more unique. It was smack bang right in the middle of Africa, in a country called Zaire, the present-day DRC, in a city called Kinshasa. The world had never seen a fight of this magnitude before in a place like this. The dynamics was different. The atmosphere was different. The spectators themselves had never seen a fight in their country like this. And that's the thing about Africa. As much as there's opportunity, there's also uncertainty. To spice it even further, the spectators, all 60,000 of them, thronged the stadium. The fight happened between about 1 and 3 a.m. SAST time. These spectators represent the customers, the guys who ultimately make the final decision, the product that you take to market. And last but not least was this gentleman, Mobutu Sese Seko, who was the dictator of Zaire in 1974. He injected in 1974 $10 million US hard cash of his own money in the fight. Well, was it his own money? He was a dictator. Let's assume he had an ATM in his house. But again, that's the reality of Africa. As much as there's opportunity and certainty, there's also risk. But all of these are ingredients in terms of what you make out of it. So with that, we'll go to the first nugget, which is T, understanding your territory. And just to give us some insight on that, just watch this clip.
Hunting track and started calling your people, and he had found out how to say killing in their language, which was Dumande. Muhammad found that out. He changed code right from the get-go. He was the hero. The other guy was the enemy. George was the enemy. So by fight time, I got that there were more than a handful of people in Zaire who weren't looking for Ali.
Muhammad Ali flew in a few weeks earlier than George Foreman. And by doing this, it allowed him to engage and connect with the people of Zaire to such an extent that on the day of the fight, in a stadium packed with over 60,000 people, as Muhammad Ali, the underdog, strode onto the boxing ring, the crowd was screaming, Ali! Sorry. Boumaye! Ali! Boumaye! Which when you translate it from the vernacular, means Ali, kill him. Ali, kill him. In stark comparison, George Foreman, who was the world boxing champion at that time, before he even strode onto the boxing ring, before the fight had even begun, the market leader it lost the crowd. In other words, it lost market share. And one of the key fundamentals for you to be successful in the African market is to understand the very DNA and the fabric of the society of the continent. Because in that, it puts you competitively ahead of your competitors. When I talk about Africa, we all know 54 countries, 54 heads of state, 54 people groups. It's all about complexity. But companies and organizations that have been successful on the continent have embraced the heterogeneity of the African continent and not tried to homogenize it. Because when you try and make it one piece of land with one set of people, you always get into a mess up. And one of the ways I explain and unpack this is by saying the calabash effect. For those of you that are not familiar with the calabash, it's a hardened fruit, or using it in rural areas, or it could be a clay pot. But the one thing about a calabash, you can never see from afar what's in there. You have to be up close. And sometimes, if you're in the rural areas and there's no light, you actually have to smell and make sure what you're drinking is water and not traditional beer. But again, it talks to understanding and doing business in the African continent. You have to be in touch with what's on the ground. And as I unpack this masterclass today, giving you some real case studies, hopefully that will also galvanize you along the same lines. So what the African conundrum is having different challenges and opportunities at the same time with regards to the African continent. And I hope you can see my map there, but there's the African map. And what I'm going to share with you are 5 key data points. There's a saying that beauty is the eye of the beholder. And I'm going to share with you 5 data points from an Africa perspective, and we're going to look at it from 2 different perspectives. Just highlighting in terms of the conundrum that is there, but ultimately is how you view the continent and what it means for you. So the first data point or statistic I'm going to show you is unemployment. Now, once again, I must categorically state, I hate talking about Africa from a continental perspective because a lot is diluted. And the case in point is this example. The average unemployment rate in Africa is 7%. But we know in South Africa, what's the average unemployment rate? Let me ask an economist. 30, 40 plus, 30%, 40 plus. Yeah, I think for Egypt is plus or minus 6%. Chad, which has got the lowest unemployment rate in Africa, is 1%. So you say to yourself, why am I not working in Chad? Because Chad's GDP is about plus or minus 10 billion US dollars. South Africa's GDP is 450 billion US dollars, plus or minus. So you get the gist. Averages, when you're looking at Africa, totally distort. But for the sake of starting from somewhere, let's start with unemployment. We know it's a big problem in Africa. South Africa, it's a huge problem. The unemployment rate, 15 to 24 age group, is probably hitting the 60% now. But unemployment is a big challenge in Africa, average of 7%. In first world countries, I think in the US it's plus or minus 5%, 4%, but we know our economies are nowhere near that. Another challenging point in Africa is infrastructure. And my colleague here who plays in Swiss sport, obviously you know that. Talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, you know the challenges that are there. It's something that is very necessary for the continent. But the challenge from an infrastructure perspective, just to give some context, in terms of the infrastructure gap per annum that we need, Africa is short by 100 billion US dollars every year. After we've borrowed money, after we've built the roads, what we still need to build and maintain this continent to take it to be having the ideal infrastructure to support AFCFTA and all those other initiatives, on average per annum, we need 100 billion US dollars that we're short of. Okay. The second challenge is climate change. 9 out of 10 of the worst impacted countries in the world are going to be in Africa, mostly coastal cities. We've seen with the floods in Durban. So again, another challenge. And obviously climate change also talks to agriculture, food production, which is a dilemma. The fourth component is our fiscal debt ratio. The average fiscal debt ratio in Africa is 63.5%. I think South Africa is higher. I think it's probably plus or minus, it's going to the 80% if I'm not wrong. But again, we need to build stuff. We don't have enough money. We don't have the right credit ratings in order to borrow. We've seen countries like Kenya with the consequences of the IMF loan. We've seen Ethiopia now has also just got their first 1.5 billion. All of those comes with strings attached and strangulate the economy of the African perspective. Then the last one, most interesting. Since 1950, the world has suffered 492 coup d'etats. 220 of them have been Africa. Of those 220, 109 have been successful. So ladies and gentlemen, we are subject matter experts when it comes to coup d'etats in Africa. So this obviously talks to a leadership problem that we have on the continent. It's actually, I think it's now 221 because DRC 3 months ago had a failed coup d'etat, apparently supported by the American. I'm from the American chamber, so I can say this. It was supported by the Americans, but you guys mustn't say that I say that because supposedly so. But 5 data points talking in terms of challenges with Africa. So let's spin this around. I talked about unemployment, but even in this challenging environment that we have with unemployment, looking at last year alone, according to the EY report, about 150 jobs were created on the African continent through FDI investment of 195 billion. And that's more or less the average. It actually went down last year, but it's increasing. And these were from first world countries like yourselves that are investing on the continent and still seeing opportunity. So with unemployment, but the world out there still realizes that we've got the opportunity to develop. South Africa probably now is one of the best outsourcing destinations for skills globally. We talked about infrastructure. I think since 2023, $62 billion infrastructure has been invested on the continent. Again, from first world countries invested on the continent, not just China, the USA, France, the UAE. We talked about climate change and the realities of there. Clean tech is now becoming the leading attraction for FDI investment on the African continent. Obviously, there's a lot of incentives around it, but for me, it's a positive sign. 61 billion from 2020 to 2023 that has been invested in clean tech. And you'll see some extra stats later on that will give perspective to that. Industrialization, absolutely critical, especially with AFCFTA. From 2020, from 2005 to 2025, that's 10 years, 20 years. My maths is not that good. I do have a PhD, but I didn't do maths as an elective. So that was a joke, by the way. But industrialization is expected to double by 930 billion. So again, a key component. And one of my favorites is by 2050, 40% of the world's youth is in Africa. Obviously, this talks to the leadership challenge that we have on the other side. But by 2050, 40% of the world's youth will be in Africa. That means we'll be the source of initiation, a source of innovation, a source of young people that are able to change the world. So as much on the one side you've got the negative issues, you can see that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It highlights the opportunities on the African continent. Thank you, madam. I can see you're an iPhone person because. Okay, you guys are still with me? Yes. Don't look so serious, man. It's a breakfast. So, in each of the case studies, in each of the nuggets that I share with you, I'll leave you the case study. And I'm going to start off with my first case study, which is from my home country, Zimbabwe. There's nobody from immigration here, because I've seen Leon Schreiber's been doing his homework, so I must just make sure my ID was legal. So from Zimbabwe, and I know one or two of my colleagues are here, but I'm just going to give you a first case study in terms of understanding the territory. I'm going to start off with the company I was working at the time, but just to give you some context, it was 2005. The GDP for Zimbabwe at that time was $4.4 billion US dollars, and inflation was 586%. So that's triple-digit inflation. I mean, it just boggles your mind in terms of how you do business then. But I was in there and I was hustling to make some money. The reason you've got Forever 21 there, and I always do this because sometimes we get carried away with Africa, but it's important to know in the bigger world where do we stand. Forever 21 in 2005 was ranked as number 91 by Forbes. I think it was looking at the FTSE 100, Fortune 500 listed companies. And in terms of revenue, Forever 21 was ranked number 91, and its turnover was 4.4 billion US dollars. So it just gives you context in terms of Zimbabwe, as much as we've got all these dynamics, we're a small country, but out of that, some magical things happened. I was working for a company that was a business management software vendor, and we were selling and implementing software that we had to import from the UK. So we had to pay Forex to get the software and be able to maintain the consultants. We had about 50 highly skilled consultants that I used to oversee as the general manager of the organization. And the two biggest challenges that we had in terms of running the business was currency and fuel. And bear in mind, we're opening a triple-digit inflation, 586%. But even in this environment, as a software vendor or as a reseller, we were the best in 2005. We were the best performing vendor in US dollars, not only in Africa, but for that product line, but in Europe, Middle East, Asia, and Australia. So you ask yourself, how did we outperform our competitors in better economies based on what we're going through? Three simple things that talk to understanding the territory. The first thing that we did is that we approached our supplier, which was a UK listed company, and we basically said to them, we've been in this market for the last 20 years. We know the clients. We're not able to remit to the foreign currency, but if you allow us to continue servicing these clients and supplying the software based on our relationship with you, we'll ensure by the time the economy turns around, you'll be able to have a client base that is there. And obviously, if you know software companies, they survive the annual license fees. So it was a retention strategy. They were with us, they understood our strategy, they backed us up, and that was the first thing. The second thing that we did is that in an economy that is falling short of foreign currency, you target people who export. It doesn't make rocket science. If anybody's exporting, how do they get paid? In foreign currency. So we changed our strategy and decided to focus on people who were doing exporting. And that also helped in terms of mitigating our risk. And the third component is that you got triple-digit inflation. The software itself was accounting software. So we just saw the whole value proposition in terms of cost control is key, and that in itself made a difference. It's not rocket science, but it's a matter of just understanding the territory. And by doing that, not only did we outperform in the local market, other resellers, but globally in terms of the other leading markets that was there. So as I come to learn this, I always boast at this point. I think there are only two other people, because I know my sister is there. She's from Zimbabwe. None of you have been millionaires in dollars before. I've been a millionaire in dollars. What you're seeing there is the 100 trillion official dollar note for Zimbabwe. I think when I left Zim, my salary was 16 million Zim dollars. I couldn't buy even a loaf of bread with it, but anyway, it just makes you feel good. And this, so if you thought, I told you 2005 inflation was plus or minus 586%, triple-digit inflation. In 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation surged. By then, I'd relocated and come to South Africa. My old boss was the owner of the company, was still running the company, and he was still be successful applying those nuggets. But this is what inflation was in Zim dollars. And still, the economy was pumping and being successful. So, to learn this nugget, I'm going to give you the first quiz. As I said, this it's a complimentary copy of my book with a Belgian chocolate. Next time I'll upgrade and go Swiss. But before I ask you the quiz, the person you're seeing there is the Minister of Finance. I met him in 2019. Professor Hwindingwi is still the Minister of Finance. He's an Oxford graduate, very brilliant man. And I met him at the World Economic Forum. And I was part of a delegation, the Africa World Economic Forum that happened in South Africa in 2019. And I was a part of a delegation of executives in the diaspora who went to meet him and the president. I have also a picture of me and the president, but it doesn't sell me well. So I've just stuck to the finance minister. I want to complicate my life. And I met him, and we really positioned in terms of opportunities we believe that could come into the country to change the economy around. Some of them were heard, whether they will be implemented or not, that's another story. But it just made me learn that as much as there's opportunity, the threat is always there. But before we go to the end of the next nugget, the quiz I want to ask you, the first person who puts up their hand gets this complimentary copy of Belgian chocolate. And you can't ask if you're Zimbabwe, because I know they're my sister here from Zimbabwe, is which World Cup tournament in 2027 will be co-hosted by Zimbabwe? Sir, the Cricket World Cup. Did anybody know that? No? Woo, clap for him. Thank you. Please give it to him. And do you know which city? Do you know which city specifically? Zimbabwe Investment Summit, the Minister of Tourism Industry. I think it's Namibia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And it will be, and they're actually building an international cricket facility there. Okay, so as we learn the first nugget, I'll end with this African proverb. It's also this proverb is available in my books, and it talks to territory where water is the boss, the land must obey. And the picture you're seeing there is the scenic Victoria Falls, which is a great example of land and water creating something beautiful. And the key lesson here is that sometimes to survive on the African continent, it's not about fighting the territory, it's understanding, navigating across it, and out of that, sometimes key solutions come out. Okay, right. You guys are still with me? Right, we're going to the second nugget, which is innovation. So, one of the key things that Muhammad Ali knew going back to the fight is that he knew that there was no way he could beat George Foreman, because George Foreman, using the traditional tactics that Muhammad Ali used in the past, George Foreman was stronger than he was, and he was younger than he was. So he had to think out of the box. He had to use a technique that this guy would be unsuspecting of. And one of those techniques that he used is a technique called rope-a-dope, which became popular because of Muhammad Ali in this specific fight. And rope-a-dope is a technique is where the boxer uses the ropes of the ring to absorb the punches of his opponent. And to illustrate this bit of more detail, just look at this clip. The sound is not great because this was a 1974 clip, but you can see from the imagery what comes out.
People don't realize about Ali is that he could take a punch better than people thought. And he probably took pretty good beating for him. But he worked on taking the bottom punches. He worked on letting whatever he protected his head. He wasn't a big hit knockout punch. And he just stood there and he let Foreman punch himself out. And then tactics were up for him. People complain and say, hey, everybody's not letting him punch him in the stomach. And they leave him also did. By the end of the seventh round, Foreman looked exhausted. Ali was ready to pass. Suddenly, midway through the eighth round, Ali came out punching. Unbelievably, Ali had knocked out George Foreman and won back the heavyweight championship of the world 7 years after it was stripped from him.
So when you're talking about innovation in Africa, there's so many different elements. But one key element that is absolutely critical is the role of the digital transformation. Now, I'm always wary about talking about digital transformation, having come from a technology background by myself, in the sense that people always say that technology allows us to leapfrog into different era. But the challenge is that sometimes when you leapfrog, you forget the reality of the things you're jumping over. And to a certain extent, it's happened in Africa. But having said that, technology has had a unique effect, or quite a specific effect, with regards to the business landscape of the African continent. And just to share with you some stats, if you look at from 2024 to 2029, the growth of internet users on the African continent, using this just as an indicator with regards to technology and the impacts having on the African continent, grew by 377 million. So the total number of users expected by end of 2029 that will be using internet or having internet on the African continent is plus or minus 1.1 billion. Now, I always bring this with regards to the context from a world perspective. From a global perspective, if you look at the numbers, they've grown from for the same period, 1.1 billion. The total number of users estimated at the end of 2029 will be 7 billion. So probably be 1/7 of the world population. But from a growth perspective, you can see a growth of 52% compared to 17%, highlighting again the opportunity around leveraging of technology from an Africa perspective. And drilling onto this, technology, one of the key drivers that is complementing growth of the African continent, complemented by technology, is VC investment, venture capitalists. And I'm going to unpack this number in a bit more detail, but why is this so important? A lot of venture capitalists coming on the African market are focusing on solutions that have got a social impact. And this is going to talk a lot in terms of how organizations, multinationals, multilaterals can make the right impact in Africa. In 2023 alone, you can see that our VC deals, we attracted 545, it was about 3.6 billion US dollars. It was actually, you'll see on the next slide, this was a decrease actually about 46% from the previous year. Usually on Africa, it's plus or minus 6.5 billion. But again, I always show in this in context to the rest of the world. So we jump up and down. significant growth on the African continent, great opportunity. But if you look at America, it's 144 billion. Another emerging market, which is Latin America, you can see it was 3 billion. For me, this is not a dismal picture. It just shows that if we get our X right with our population, with our capabilities, the world is our oyster. So it just shows opportunity for us developing solutions here that we can go global with. So let's break down that 3.6 billion to a bit more detail. 3.6 billion, year on year, it's a decrease of 46% from the previous year, but the leading countries are attracting VC capital with regards to tech startups on the African continent are, I'm moving too fast there. You can't see my line there, I'll have to darken it, but South Africa followed by Nigeria, Egypt, and Kenya. Actually, the country that usually leads on average every year is Nigeria. From a fintech perspective, Nigeria is still the leader, but South Africa is taking a lead, and specifically Cape Town. I know you people in Gauteng hate to hear this, but the Cape Townians are doing something right to a certain extent, and that's attracting VC capital. So again, showing that innovation, technology coming together to make the right kind of impact. Now, if we take that 3.6 billion and we divide it by industry, you'll see that the leader with regards to that 3.6 billion, and again, the trend has been consistent for the last 10 years, is fintech. The digital economy from a financial perspective is leading, followed by e-commerce, which is your takealot.coms and your AWSs. And funny enough, you realize that clean tech and health tech before COVID were actually in the midsection, have worked their way up. So again, just give you an indication in terms of as we innovate and provide solutions for Africa, where's the money going, but what's attracted the most popular areas. And this again gives you insight in terms of how digital transformation from an innovative perspective is making an impact. So go to our second case study. One of my favorite countries, Nigeria. Chaotic, full of oil and money, a lot of action, but I love the country. So I think this was 2010, if I'm not wrong. Can you guys hear me okay? The feedback is not bad? Okay, cool. I can give my back to my sons. That's okay temporarily. So 2010, I was part of a multinational called Sage, listed on the London Stock Exchange, and I'll share with you some stats, and you must keep these in mind. The GDP of Nigeria at the time was about 369 billion. It was slightly behind South Africa, which was 375 billion. And I was working as an exec at Sage, and I was tasked with leading the growth strategy into Nigeria. Sage is a UK multinational. Our EMEA head office was in South Africa. Our strategy with our various offerings from a business management software perspective had been successful in Europe, in the USA, and even in Southern Africa. So to grow and expand aggressively in the Nigerian market for us was a walk in the park. Bear in mind at that time, Nigeria, a huge population, plus or minus 169 million. Over and above that, very entrepreneurial. So we believed that we had the right solution that was targeted for the entry-level market. Just to give you further context on Sage at the time, with regards to our turnover, we were doing about $1.3 billion per annum. So keep these stats in mind because it will give you insight as you go along the journey. With 3 million clients worldwide, we're in 50 countries. We've been around for 30 years, and we're one of the top 3 business management software companies in the world after SAP and Oracle. And last, as I said, we've been there for 30 years. So we're a George Foreman when it came to business management software, so we believed. Sage at the time, as I was leading this initiative into the Nigerian market, we identified the right product that we believe would be absolutely critical for the market. It was our startup software accounting package. It was retailing for about $100. We were so aggressive in getting market share, we discounted it by 70% to $30. Our strategy was going to flood that market, and then with annual license fees and retention strategy, get the returns over the years. We said if we looked at the population of South Africa, plus or minus 50 million, with the indicators of success that we'd had, we said an economy like 169, it wasn't rocket science. You just extrapolate that graph, we're going to get bigger returns. After a year, we threw the kitchen sink at everything. Marketing, events, road shows, selling ourselves in a proper manner, not just for the record. All that investment in finance. And what was the return on investment? Almost close to nothing. I was flabbergasted. I did not even understand why we were failing. By then, I had my PhD, international strategy. which was extra humiliation in terms of why we were failing in this market. It was on one of my trips down there that a colleague of mine who was based in the Nigerian market took me aside and he said to me, Rutendo, I think I understand why we're battling in this market. But what I want you to do is to follow me. Don't say anything because he was politely telling me just to shut up. Follow me and I'll show you why we're battling in this market. So it took me to what you're seeing there is an informal marketplace. It's called Mohammed Murtala, next to Mohammed Murtala, the airport. It's a place called Ikeja. It's on the outskirts of the airport. And it's an informal market space. And just to give you context, it's the size of Ellis Park Football Stadium. So it's not a big geographical place. But they sell all sorts of wares there, from cell phones to laptops, you name it, you can get it there. So we waded through the crowds until we got to one of the vendors where the suitcase that was stacked with CDs. He went up to the gentleman, and remember I'd been told to shut up, and he asked the gentleman, please can I have one Sage CD? Without hesitation, the gentleman dipped into his bag and he pulled out a CD, and he asked him, how much, my Oga, for that one Sage CD? And again, without hesitation, the gentleman said, I'll sell it to you for $1, but hang on, I'm negotiable on pricing. I'll sell it to you for $1, but I'm negotiable on pricing. The same product that we had thrown into the market after 70% discount from $100 to $30 was being sold on the streets of Nigeria for $1, but at a negotiable for pricing. So I began to, that was the first thing that gobsmacked me. So I began to research a bit on this computer village. And I found that about 7,000 entrepreneurs operated in that facility. Again, bear in mind, it's the size of a football stadium. Those 7,000 entrepreneurs amongst themselves employed plus or minus 50,000 people. But the number that blew me away, and it was referenced by the ICT manager at the time, it was estimated the turnover that was going through that computer village per annum was $2 billion. Sage, a listed company on the London Stock Exchange, been around for 30 years, has 3 million customers worldwide, with 50 customers, was being outstripped by an informal market that was the size of a football stadium by $0.7 billion. We quickly realized that for us to target the informal market of our solution offering in Nigeria was a waste of time. The regulatory framework and the structure did not support us. We started to focus on the enterprise clients. Why? Because globally, legally, they cannot use pirated software. And believe it or not, we didn't make the same quantum that we have made in the entry-level marketplace, but we did have triple-digit growth. And we had to realign our strategy. It was a combination of innovation, understanding the territory, and all of those played a key role. So, for you smart people in the room, I think this was at the UK conference for Africa Investment Summit, where I met President Muhammad Buhari, who was the former president of Nigeria. You can actually see I was not smiling because I photobombed him in terms of the selfie. I was sitting behind him and I just said smile. And by the time it hit him, I did. But anyway, that's not our quiz question. I just showed this for fun. But for the next prize, for the quiz, in 2023, who was Nigeria's largest export partner? I'll give the prize to the person who's closest. Anybody give a try? Come on, guess. Not China. I don't know if it's a Nordic country, but we'll confirm. Yeah, close. It starts with an N. Come again? UAE, no. It's a shocker when you research these things. Don't Google. Somebody's Googling. Hey, wait. I see you. Hey. Netherlands. It's Netherlands. Well done. Clap for her. And just out of interest, after petroleum and oil and gas, what is Nigeria's second biggest export? The funny one, you'll be shocked. Come again? Flowers, though. I wouldn't get flowers from Nigeria. No, it's cheese. Yeah, this shows is the SwissCham. It's actually mineral fertilizers and fertilizers. They actually produce that in export. Maybe there's a tool called Google. If you look at it, but Netherlands, it's a combination of gas and fertilizers, and there's a third company. Because Netherlands is, people actually don't know this, I didn't know this. After America, it's probably the biggest exporter of agricultural produce globally. And a lot of the, obviously, so from a fertilizer perspective, makes sense. But it should be petroleum, the energy, and the fertilizers. Thank you. All right. Yeah, and it's about 8.17 billion, which is 12.5% of the export share. All right, guys. So coming to the second nugget, as we learn this, I like this, another African proverb: no one tests the depth of a river with both feet unless they are prepared to swim. It talks about understanding the territory, and it talks quite next into the third nugget that we'll be going into. Am I still okay with time, Eve? Yeah. Good. Okay. So you guys are still with me? Yeah. All right. So the first nugget was, and then the second one, innovation. So threats and opportunities. Threats and opportunities, I always bring them together. Why? Because one means opportunities and another means threat. One means threat, another means opportunity. I know when you go and you guys all do your MBA, you do your SWOT analysis, you do it all separately. But the reality in Africa, a threat is as good as opportunity and vice versa. So, as we identify threats and opportunities, going back again to the fight, Muhammad Ali, again, just as much as there was the opportunity to beat George Foreman and win the world boxing match, the threat was George Foreman as well. So just highlight in terms of threats and opportunities, and yet to navigate around that. And another boxer, Mike Tyson, is this saying that I always love: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And when it comes to threats and opportunities, a classical example. 5-10 years ago, most of you guys in here with the corporate organizations you work for, even your governments, it set up your 10-year plans, 20-year plans, your trajectories. This is what we're going to do. These are the resources we need, etc., etc. And then what happened? COVID hit us. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that totally disorientated us. And again, that's the nature of threats and opportunities. But the question is, how do you navigate that in a positive way? So I'm just going to highlight some graphs here. And in January, I participated with The Economist when they launched the Africa Outlook report. So these stats were there, and I gave insight into some of them. I know RMB has just released its Africa Trends report, but if you look at this, the trends are more or less the same. But this just talks again in terms of the threats and opportunities we have in Africa. I know the graph is small. What you're looking there is the African economic graph. If afterwards you want the slides, feel free to connect me. And it's just talking about the year-on-year growth. And the key thing it highlights is the diversity. So for South Africa, it's plus or minus 2% that is expected from a year-on growth perspective. You go to Senegal, I think it's plus or minus 10%. The concern is always that the bigger boys, 40% of Africa's GDP is in 4 countries. 40% of Africa's GDP is in 4 countries. Does anybody want to take? You'll probably get the first 3 right. The fourth one you'll battle. South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, which is the fourth one? Algeria. Currently, it's Algeria. It might change to Ethiopia. No, Ethiopia is way down. Growth, specifically, yes, but in terms of 40% of the Africa's GDP is in 4 countries. And it gives you a reality check, because you start thinking 40% of 54 countries is only in 4 countries. Then it totally creates a diversity in terms of the economy of the continent. And that's why it's so important to look at country by country, sector by sector. You can't just homogenize it. Okay, so the other factor is the elections. The orange, sorry again for the size, but the orange just highlights the countries that are going to have elections this year. Obviously talking to instability. Fortunately, South Africa has come right with the GNU. We see how far that goes, but we do not have a civil war, which is a good thing. The world's fastest growing economies, again, you'll see the ones that are there from an Africa perspective, as your Senegals, Mauritania, Libya, Rwanda, DRC, Benin, Uganda, Maldives, Tanzania. None of these are the big boys. So again, yes, it's good that they're growing year on year, but as I said, if unemployment is 1% in Chad, which is a GDP of plus or minus 10 billion, are you really going to be excited to go and work there? Food for thought. And then the last stats again is just talks with regards to coup d'etats and leadership and settlement. Another fascinating point, I showed you the fintech trends in terms of attracting FDI, venture capitalists. The biggest region that attracts on a regular basis the greatest FDI investment with regards to the fintech space is, from a region perspective, fintech is the West African region. And you can see the level of instability there. So when the president says, where should I invest the most in terms of fintech? It's actually in the most high-risk political areas on the continent. Funny, eh? Welcome to Africa. So, but having said this, in the survey that they did, coming back to the economies, they surveyed about 50 multinational CEOs operating on the African continent. And there were a series of questions that they asked them. But this relates in terms of navigating through threats and opportunities. And one of the questions they asked them, says, how do you expect your business in Africa to be affected by the following global developments? So just to ease this, the green means where they see significant opportunity, and the black means a significant challenge. And there were probably 4 categories that they identified: climate change, greater ESG requirements, rising commodity prices, regulatory and compliance challenges, and election year. The point for me is wherever there's a black, there's a green. Obviously, election was a big concern, but still, people saw opportunity there. The regulatory framework was also a challenge. You can see climate change wasn't a big issue, and maybe that explains the investment from an ESG perspective as well as ESG requirements. All I'm just highlighting from this, which has been displayed by CEOs, C-suite leaders in business similar to you, is the fact that as much as there are challenges in the African market, people are seeing the opportunity and the threat and navigating across the threats. So we'll go to our third case study. We cool, guys? Yeah. Okay, Ethiopia. There was a lady who said Ethiopia. Where is she? Where is she? Yeah. You're not from Ethiopia, are you? Thank you, I'll take that. So, 2019, I think. So 2019, there was an investment roadshow that I led there, but just to give some context again to Ethiopia with regards to numbers, GDP 91 billion US dollars. So again, you see the difference. Is Ethiopia the second most populous country on the continent after Nigeria, a population of about 115 million. But you can see our GDP, just to give context again, is 405 billion. So Ethiopia is probably 1/4 of that. 2018, construction industry, Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, opened up the economy. Some exciting things are happening in Ethiopia right now, by the way. I don't know if you know, Boeing, that's an American company, has moved its headquarters from South Africa to Ethiopia. That's a big thing. Second thing that has happened recently with Ethiopia is that they floated their foreign exchange onto the open market. So there was a difference of about 50 points between the black market and the official rate. And now they've opened it up, and it's allowed them to get their first loan from IMF of 1.5 billion US dollars. My only advice to the Ethiopian president is that every blessing is a curse. We've looked at the Kenya scenario, and the challenge is that that money is going to come with challenges in terms of sustainability. But that's a story for another day. But I've highlighted construction because there was a big opportunity in terms of growth, in terms of the infrastructure space, and 7.1 billion was the size of the infrastructure market in Ethiopia. And this was a company called Con Digital that capitalized on this because it provided digital solutions to deal with corruption because everything was manual. But construction infrastructure was a big play. So going to the case study that I want to share with you. So in 2019, I was still at Deloitte at the time, and we organized and led a delegation to go to Ethiopia for the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers in the car space. So they came together. They asked us, Deloitte, for us to coordinate it. For those that can't see me, I'm this handsome-looking guy with the yellow shirt there. Where we are standing is in front of the State House of the Ethiopian president's residence, and President Saleh Work Zwed, I always battle with the name. She's the lady in the middle. So these are the CEOs leading multinational corporates based in South Africa, but responsible for Africa. So just to give you a few of them, and you can see the mixture to give context to the case study itself. This is Tom Kirby, the CEO of Toyota. This is Thomas Schaefer. I think he was a friend of the German chamber. He was the CEO of Volkswagen. You remember Thomas? He's probably, I bet you this guy is going to be the global CEO of VW. Brilliant man, sharp thinking. He knows how to rumble in the jungle. This is Tim Abbott, next to the president, CEO of BMW. And this is Martin Davies, a good colleague of mine, also a friend of the chamber that you all know. We've got Mike Whitfield right at the back, the CEO of Nissan. We've also got NAMSA. We had a whole delegation. We had Marius Donner from Citibank. We had Standard Bank, the CEO from the financial division. So why did these guys go to to Ethiopia? It was to go and meet with the government and say, we want to invest in terms of building passenger vehicles in the Ethiopian market. We see the population, we see the growth, and we think there's great opportunity, but we need to work with the government. Does that make sense? Right, just to add some stats to this. South Africa at the time had 12 million cars versus 60 million people. So the ratio of cars to every 5 people, was 1:5. Does that make sense? Simple math. Right, for another gift, what do you think the ratio, I've told you the population, don't Google, don't cheat. I've told you the population of Ethiopia. What do you think the ratio of cars to passenger vehicles was in Ethiopia at that time? It will define the opportunity. Take a guess. The person who can, I'll ask 3 people. The one who's got the closest answer will get 1 to 20, 1 to 100. Yeah, 1:500. Right. 1 to 115. Sir, who said 100? Yeah. Next time, sir. Clap for the guy. Well done. So, South Africa had 12 million cars. Ethiopia had 1 million cars. Now, do you understand why these guys got into first class to fly all the way to Ethiopia? Because can you see the quantum of the opportunity that was there to fill? And when I do my MBA classes or my leadership programs at UCT and Stellenbosch, we always go into a big discussion in terms of, if you're the president, what would you decide for? More cars or more infrastructure or none of the above? Just to cut it, you guys are not MBA students because you all look smart, so I'm not going to take you there. But to cut a long story short, we also at Isuzu. Since 2019, I actually met the head of strategy, Celestine, about 4 months ago. And out of all of these guys, the only guy who actually opened up brick and mortar in Ethiopia was Isuzu. And the other guys are still watching from the sidelines. 2 of them, Nissan and Volkswagen, have actually opened up in Rwanda and Ghana. And that's another case study altogether. But again, different strokes for different folks.
Does that ratio include German SUVs to competition?
I'll tell you after the session so I get my. But it's a valid point. Okay, just to break ice, talking about threats and opportunities and how to navigate them in a smart but easy way, just watch this clip. Who didn't get the joke? Okay. If you didn't get the joke, please come for therapy afterwards. But again, B is a threat to opportunity. And I think this thing just highlights in a beautiful way. Okay, so as you learn this, just threats and opportunities. Another African proverb, a roaring lion kills no game. And when it comes to threats, the elephant does not limp when walking on thorns. I got that from an African proverb. Absolutely beautiful. All right, guys, we're going on to our last nugget. You remember the first one? Second one? Third one? Relentless drive and determination. And we'll land this. I'm still okay on time, eh? Good. Because I want to go home and watch TV. So, cartoons specifically, I'm just joking. So, over and above him thinking innovatively, navigating through the threat and the opportunity, and I'm going back to the fight. And over and above him, also understanding the territory, Muhammad Ali had this relentless drive and determination. And that was one of the things that just made him survive and win the fight. And bearing this in mind, when you look at organizations now with where Africa is going and what it needs to achieve, that is absolutely critical. I mean, we can relate to our sports. We can relate, I mean, you look at the Olympics, some of the results that came out of there from a Botswana winning the 200 meters to an Ethiopia. Well, those guys in Ethiopia and Kenya are always running. So that's they always win those long distance races. But from South Africa, Botatanya, all of those components. At the end of the day, we have to have that relentless drive and determination, especially if you want to make the right impact in Africa over and above the other nuggets I've shared. And as I come to the end, I always like you leaving off with this case study because it's a good example of a corporate and the impact it made, and not just from a number, ESG indicator, tick the box, SDG, we've done it, but from a real practical examples and again from my own experience. And this is my last nugget before we land this plane. So in 2022, I was working for a digital skilling company, and we were partnered up with Microsoft. Microsoft did a vehicle called the African Transformation Office, and this vehicle was them specifically to make impact on the African market to deal with the challenges of skills and resources. Obviously, Microsoft provides software. We were a training partner, and they had a big ambition to skill 5 million software developers on the African continent. The target that they wanted to skill in terms of creating and contributing positive GDP were the graduates from university. So people who had done their IT qualifications and they were not employable. It was going to be a 3-month program. And that was the target market. And they wanted to skill 5 million software developers in the next 5 years, and we're the training partner. But just to add some stats into this, and again, I'm using them holistically, but it gives you context to identify the nature of the problem. So what was the challenge? Per year, and you can look at the United Nations figures, the International Labour Organization figures, per year, 16 million young Africans are facing unemployment. So as Africa, we've got on average 16 million young Africans. So you're looking at the age gap between 15 to 25. So okay, that excludes you and me, but as of yesterday, but just to let you know, okay. Over and above that, so we've already got 16 unemployed youths. Over and above that, every year we pump 11 million additional youths into that economy. Okay, so we have already got an average 16 million. Every year we are producing another 11 million graduates into that space. But over and above that, we're only producing plus or minus 3.7 million jobs as a continent per annum. And remember, those are the jobs that only not those young people are pursuing, that even you and I are pursuing one way or the other. That's the reality. Sub-Saharan Africa has an informal employment rate of about 89%. So there are about 89% of the people in the sub-Saharan market are entrepreneurs of some sort. So that's the challenge. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So with Microsoft, obviously in terms of developing a skill base, they came up with this program. They said, look, we see the opportunity that is there. If we skill and we give digital skills to these people, not only will they be able to contribute to the African economy, but going into the gig economy, they can export their service without physically going. Obviously, people may still relocate, but skill, you're still making a positive impact. So it's creativity, innovation, economic transformation. Basically, if this project worked, it would tick all the right boxes. So I was the MD of the company. It's called Elevate. And there were 5 key components in terms of the solution we're offering and that we actually built. The first was that we're going to skill 3, so I said 5 million, it's 3 million software developers, and it was going to be done over 5 years. So that's the first component. And in order to be practical, there are 54 countries. You have to hit those countries that have got the most significant impact, and I'll show you those. But we're going to focus on 5 countries, and if we get it right on 5 countries, we'll roll out to the next country. 3 million over 5 years, and after that, we'll do the rest of Africa. So looking at the breakdown, sorry, I'm blocking you guys. Looking at the breakdown of those countries that we're going to prioritize, we're going to actually start off in Nigeria, followed by South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, and Morocco. And the idea is, think of it of a critical effect force, whereby if you get it right with those 5 countries, you kind of then stimulate the other economies. It's not about size. Obviously, Kenya is probably small from a GDP, from a population perspective, but we know technology is a key player there. For North Africa, you can't leave out Egypt and Morocco. Nigeria from a West Africa perspective in South Africa. We did the first pilot in order to get the model right in Nigeria, and we targeted about 125 young graduates. Is that my phone? No, okay. 125 graduates that we targeted, and those are the actual graduates that we took on the pilot. We were funded by Microsoft. The company was called Elevate 8, and this is the country manager is John Sikak, a good colleague of mine who's standing in the middle. It was, the qualification itself was a mixture of soft skills and hard skills in terms of training, so no rocket science there. Now, this is an important fact. It was a 3-month course. Remember, these guys were unemployed. They came straight out of school. In the last month, what we'd do is we'd get different technology companies to come and interview these guys. 80% of them got jobs straight off the bat just after the 3-month contract. So it was a high impact, high skill, and 80% of them got jobs. The remaining 20% became entrepreneurs. So at the end of the day, it's almost a 100% effective solution. Potential tech entrepreneurs, and I say the total number of 125. So for me, this was a real project, corporates making an impact on the African continent for a problem that's existing. And even more importantly, I've put 3 individuals. These are guys I've met. I was with them before at the beginning of the course and at the end. But these are faces of people who could have been contributed to that 16 million number I was talking about unemployment, that are right now have gone through the program and they've got jobs and are not only feeding themselves, but are also feeding their family. When it comes to corporates making an impact on the African continent and making relevant, leveraging of understanding the territory, being innovative, navigating through threats and opportunities, if we don't do all of that and make an impact where it matters, then we're wasting the time. According to the Human Capital Report for Deloitte, they highlighted 3 key areas for impact for a country or for a company to make on the African continent. Having collective aspirations, broader society, and providing jobs. And again, it just highlights the importance of the responsibilities we as corporate Africa have in terms of solving the solutions of the African continent. So I'll end with this one, and it's probably my last slide. And it's from, speaking of the Olympics, it happened in 1968. And the gentleman you're seeing there is an athlete called John Stephen Akwari. He was a Tanzanian Olympic runner. And in 1968, he was sent by his country to go and participate in the Mexico Olympics. And with marathons, the guys start off somewhere in the middle of town, then they'll end off at the stadium, depending which country it was held. It's unlike France, where you'll end up in a river. Just a joke. But they started off the normal race, and somewhere along the race, John Stephen Akwari got injured, and the paramedics had to take him aside. And bear in mind, I'm talking on the nugget of relentless drive and determination. They took him on the side, and his leg had been fractured a number of places. He had actually quite a bad fall. And the paramedics took him on the side, and they started treating him. And when they'd finished, obviously it took a bit of time, he insisted that he wanted to continue the race. And by this time, all the other runners had got to the stadium, and they were more or less just winding down. But this gentleman insisted and said, "Look, I want to finish the race." And the paramedic said, "Okay, he's from Africa. These guys have never got right anyway. Let's just let the guy run." So he continued. And by this time, the stadium, the guys were packing up. Both media and spectators were winding down, saying the last runner is coming. And then somebody shouted and said, "Look, there's somebody still hobbling into the stadium." And the picture you see there is the actual picture of John Stephen Akwari in 1968 as he hobbled across to the finishing line. And you can see from his right leg the bandaging because of the areas he'd fractured his leg. And he made it across the line, and a swarm of both media and spectators came to him. And the one similar question that everybody asked them in terms of, "John, you were injured, even your time is not going to be recorded because you've exceeded the time limit. What was it that caused you or pushed you in terms of finishing the race? Because it doesn't make sense to us, and it would be great to know." And it was his response, ladies and gentlemen, that he gave in 1968 that has not only made him go down in the annals of Olympic history, but has also made him a hero in his country. His response was this. He says, "My country did not send me 5,000 miles to start the race. They sent me 5,000 miles to finish the race." Thank you for the clap, but I'm on 4,999 miles. So the 4 nuggets for a winning business in Africa. 1, understand your territory. 2, think innovatively. 3, navigate through threats and opportunities. And 4, have a relentless drive and determination. As Africa, we've got the impact, we've got the capability, we've got the skills, we've got the will. And if anything, we're open for business. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And I hand it back to you, Kanki.